Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Thanks for coming to hear some more about empathy. I'm so excited that we're speaking right after Fatima because that was such an amazing sort of primer to getting in other people's worlds, and that's exactly what we're here to talk about. And so really quickly, to get in your world, could everyone, by show of hands, tell me what you do? Are you a developer? Raise your hand. Okay. Do you work in Drupal but more in the periphery? Are you a project manager, designer, business development? Okay. And then are you a little further on the periphery? Maybe you're a content admin, maybe your company's considering building a site using Drupal. Okay, good mix. Sounds good. So this talk is really empathy lessons from the center and the periphery. Nick is a developer. He's going to be talking primarily to developers, but if you're not a developer, take notes for the developers that you work with. Really good tools that your agency or company can be using. And I guess we can go to the next slide.
Yep.
So introducing us. Oh, there we go. I'm an account manager, and at our agency, that sort of is between the roles of client coordination and more of a project manager role. So the second half of the presentation will be a little wider of an audience. If you're not directly involved in training, same lesson to the non-developers at the beginning. Take notes for the people around you who are. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Nick for the first half.
All right, cool.
And get out of your way.
All right, so yeah, thanks for coming, everybody. It's awesome to see you all here. Like Lily mentioned, I am kind of like by trade a developer. I am in the weeds less. I manage our development team at Elevated Third, but I've been working in the Drupal space for about 10 years now, so definitely been doing it a while. And then I think like just to lay a little more groundwork from what Lily talked about, like why are we here? And I think this is sort of our thesis statement, I guess, for our talk. So we truly believe that when you're building a complex digital platform, like the admin experience and the training are both really crucial to setting that site off on a path to success. And I think for me, I've really connected with this personally a lot in the past few years. I've gotten involved in an organizer role with our camp in Denver, Drupal Camp, Colorado, and have kind of made a conscious effort to separate myself from the development of the site to really get a better perspective. And I have been the content admin in that situation, and I think that's really opened my eyes a lot to just sort of like the pains of a site that is maybe like not well built, or I mean even just like the small things that you can tweak that can cause you a lot of problems that, you know, could be pretty easily avoided with like some simple work. So like Lily said, I'm going to talk a bit about the build side. Obviously this is just a 30-minute session, so it'll be pretty high level. Like I won't get into the weeds, just kind of like some general recommendations that we found work pretty well in building, you know, planning, building, contrib stuff you can look at, maybe a little bit of custom stuff. We'll hang out afterwards. Yeah, I'll be here through the day today and some tomorrow morning, so I'm happy to talk about this stuff in more detail for anybody who's interested. So the first part of the build that I think maybe gets skipped more often than it should is planning. So the key here is you want to plan and build for real people. Like using the word empathy in the title was very intentional in the sense that I think like that's what we really try to encourage in this process, and would encourage everyone else in the room to consider in the process is, you know, be empathetic, think about the people using the site, you know, from the admin perspective on the front end, everybody, and like take a few minutes, you know, as a developer especially, to really put yourself in the shoes of someone who's interacting with your site day to day, and think about the little details, like, you know, if you can't select a target for a link that you're adding in the WYSIWYG, like what kind of like chaos does that cause for your marketing team when they realize that links can only open in the same page and they're trying to link off site. So I guess just a real quick overview of how we approach this. We adopted a doc that Palantir posted in a blog post years ago that I imagine a few people in this room have seen. We call it the build spec. I can't remember exactly what they called it in their original blog post, but it's basically like a big Google Sheets document with multiple tabs where we define what are our content types, what are our paragraph types, media entities, kind of like all of the foundational architecture of the site. And I think the actual format is less important than the fact that we're fleshing this stuff out in a much faster format than actually like building fields in Drupal and exporting configuration and importing configuration on the dev environment. where I think a lot of things with just like naming conventions and stuff become really obvious at this point, and you can catch those in a situation where it's a lot easier to maybe fix some obvious issues than when you're actually like changing stuff in a live Drupal site. All right, so the second piece is actually building the site, right? And there's 3 areas here that I want to focus on pretty briefly. Out-of-the-box tools, the contrib ecosystem, and then custom and site-specific improvements. And we'll just kind of talk through like a few basic concepts and high-level ideas here. And like I said, we won't get super deep into it, but I'm more than happy to like talk about implementation details or any questions you all have afterwards. So first area, out-of-the-box tools. There's 3 of these that we'll run through. The first is fields. If you've worked with Drupal in any capacity, like you're probably pretty familiar with fields. They're everywhere. It's like the foundational building blocks of Drupal. And I mean, I think there's a few things to keep in mind even when you're just putting fields together, right? And I think like those 3 words on the screen are where I really try to keep my head, which is like you want everything about your fields to be simple, clear, and focused. You want to name them for real people, so kind of get your head out of the developer space, I guess, when you're naming these, and think about like what the fields actually do, who's interacting with them, what kind of content are they accepting, what are they outputting on the front end of the site. Write help text that's actually helpful, or help text that exists at all. I think this is something that is easy to skip because it's it's not required in the field creation process, and nobody necessarily misses it if it's not there. But I think when good help text is there, that can be something really impactful for people interacting with those fields on the back end of your site. Field requirements, this is another one that, speaking from the developer perspective, like these things make it kind of a pain sometimes to test content because you just want to like blast through your content creation form really quickly and not take the time because you just want to sort of test a very specific thing, and field requirements don't always allow you to do that. But I think sort of making an intentional decision to do that early really forces you to do what I mentioned earlier and put yourself in the shoes of someone who's actually interacting with this content on the back end. And then finally, this is one that really came to me like acting as a content admin, that character limits and field sizes should make sense in the editor's context. Like if you want a 7-word headline, don't give them a long text field with a WYSIWYG on it. I think that's the type of thing that, especially for people who maybe aren't as familiar with just like CMS conventions and how Drupal works, I think that can really throw you off. So the second area out of the box, references, again, super prominent in the Drupal space. I'm sure, I mean, I would guess that maybe everyone in this room has kind of heard a little bit about them. There's a lot that they can do, and I think there's kind of 3 big things to think about adding reference fields. Limit them thoughtfully. If you want to reference a blog post, don't open that reference field up to everything on the site. I mean, like maybe take that a step further with views, and that's one thing that's kind of hiding under the hood, I guess you could say, with reference fields is you can build custom lists of content that you can reference from those using views. So to continue with the blog example, maybe you only want to allow them to reference specific categories of posts or something like that. I think that's quick, easy payoff. And then finally, the right widget for the job. Autocomplete fields are not always the most friendly for content admins if you don't know the name of the content that you're trying to reference. So I think, just think about is a multi-select right? Does a select make more sense? Do I want to put chosen on top of that? Like you can kind of see in the screenshot there, and like give them just a little bit more to make that easier to select. And then permissions. Again, not only for security, I think like these are a great opportunity to really tune up user roles, and if a user doesn't need access to configuration, don't give them access to configuration, which is obviously like great for security, but also great in not overwhelming people who are interacting with the site and kind of like maybe spending time browsing through a bunch of stuff that is totally irrelevant to tasks they need to accomplish on the site. All right, so part 2, the contrib ecosystem. There's a ton of great stuff out there. I'm sure there's a ton of great stuff I've never even heard of, so I'd love to hear everybody's ideas if there's stuff I don't mention here that works well for anyone in the room. I picked my favorite 10 and then found that it took way too long to talk through my top 10, so I'll just talk real briefly about 5 that I really like, and then I have an honorable mention slide, and we'll post our slide deck afterwards, so everyone can check those out in a little more detail if you want. But First one is field group. This one's been around forever, to the point where I kind of forgot it was a contrib module when I was initially doing the research for this. And I think like the point here is just to take sort of like the field naming stuff a step further. And when you have big, complicated, structured content types like Drupal is good at creating, field group does a really good job of breaking that stuff down in a way that can make it just a lot more accessible for content administrators to interact with. And then media, again, kind of on the fence about this one because media is in core now, but it's great. And I think like really adds a lot to just like the media management experience in Drupal in general. Like this is obviously a huge, huge pain point for Drupal for a really long time. One-off file upload fields are not as nice as having sort of a single collected media library that you can interact with as a content administrator. Entity Browser, again, I think a fairly new one in the group. Entity Browser is great because it lets you, do exactly what the title says, create custom entity browsers. And, you can see the example here is for videos. So it lets you do things like you can add multiple tabs to it where you can view videos or you can add a new one. It's all powered by views, so everything down there is all just like a searchable, totally customizable view that you can use to allow the person interacting with this field to know exactly what they're getting at, and then to take the organization provided by media a step further so you can actually like filter and search by the terms or whatever you might be adding to your media entities. Sorry about all the Drupalisms. Lily's totally going to call me out on that in a minute.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. Focal point. This is a great one that integrates really well with image styles in Drupal. It's not quite as customizable as something like manual crop was in Drupal 7, where it lets you, crop a very specific part of every single image you upload. But I think it's nice in the sense that it lets you choose, like it says, a focal point on the image. It's kind of like what that cross is defining up there. And then any place that image is used, you can put this in an image style, and then Drupal will sort of automatically do its best to crop around that point. So I think it works great for high volume. It's not always going to make art directors totally happy, but I think it's like a really good starting point for general content administrators in Drupal. And then the last one I'll talk about in a bit of detail is Paragraphs Browser. Obviously, if you don't use Paragraphs, this won't do much for you. At Elevated Third, we use it a ton, and this basically does the same thing that Entity Browser does, except for paragraphs. So it'll let you filter and search by your different paragraph types. And then what I really like about it that I think helps us connect to content administrators is it lets us provide a preview of what the component you're adding to the site is actually going to look like on the front end, or hopefully look like once you've created it. So it gives people an idea of just sort of like what type of assets they'll need when they're creating that. So definitely check that one out. And we actually maintain that as a company too. So like if you use it already and have suggestions, I would absolutely love to hear them afterwards. And then yeah, 5 honorable mentions. I'm running a little short on time and I don't want to take too much of Lily's, so I won't talk too much about these ones, but I think these are all great. Like if you see one up here you're curious about, like let's talk afterwards, and I'd be happy to give you a little more information. And yeah, again, we'll post the link to the slide deck, so don't feel like you need to furiously like write them all down or you'll never get it. And then finally, just real briefly, I think like custom and site-specific improvements get overlooked a lot on the admin side. I mean, like at the end of the day, an admin theme is a theme. You can customize it, modify it the same way you would any other part of like the front-end theme layer that you might think about in Drupal. And I think the big thing here is just really considering the payoff that you get from the customizations, because obviously not every client is going to want to put money into this, or if there's no sort of immediate return, it might not feel right. So I think the big thing is just like focus the custom time on what provides the most value, and the best way to do that is talk to your admins. Send out user surveys, or maybe do some user tests on your administrative side, and it's pretty cool what kind of stuff you'll learn. I mean, we'll do user testing on the admin side of our sites with our current clients to get feedback about what we can change moving forward and how we can do a better job with that stuff. And the screenshot up here is just like how we've customized the Paragraphs UI to make it like a little more approachable and sort of like collapse things down a little bit. And we swapped out like the draggable library too to make it just like a little smoother when you're actually interacting with them. And then the second part of that is views one more time. Like views is great for administrative stuff on the back end. In Drupal 8, basically everything is already built in views, so customize things that you get out of the box, take the opportunity to build like a more focused content overview page. If you have like really specific types of structured content, it's a great opportunity to give your administrators a way to maybe like filter or view information about that content that wouldn't make sense in like an overall content overview screen. And then real quick honorable mention for content moderation dashboards and custom reports. Very powerful. I won't go into too much detail because I don't want to hog up all Lily's time, but now she'll tell you a little bit about training.
All right, so let's talk about training. Now that we have this amazing site that the dev team built, it doesn't matter unless the person who's actually going to be adminning it understands how to do that. So let's talk about effectively having that conversation. And before I talk about training, I want to talk really briefly about me. Nick has been working in Drupal for, what, 8 years, something like that. I'm much newer to it. I've done a lot of random stuff, as you can see here. A lot of it is very communication-based, and I bring that sort of nonprofit spokesperson kind of, I recently learned Drupal, and it's really confusing when you're new, especially when you're working in it, and people expect you to know it, perspective to my job. And so right before I worked in Drupal, I worked part-time in French. I worked at the Alliance Française in Denver. If you live in Chicago, it's a really beautiful building here. You should check it out. They're all over the world. And it's a French language and cultural center. And so since I worked with French teachers, and I'm moderately good at French, they thought it would be fun for me to make me work in French. And so I had this experience of working part-time in French. And then I got a job at a Drupal agency, having no idea anything about the digital world, anything about what Drupal was. And I had a developer come to me and say, oh, I can't believe this client doesn't know what a field is. And I had that moment of thinking, you mean like a field, right, out there in the pasture? And I told him out loud, I don't know what a field is, right? And so I immediately thought about Drupal, like this is this second language. This is this new language for me to learn. And I still, as I work with the periphery of it, think about it in that way. And so just like when you're building and you start with a build spec before the training, prepare well. And start with thinking about who is going to lead it. And this is a controversial opinion, maybe, but I think the person who should lead your training is the person who knows the least about your website. So not the developer, maybe. I like to lead them as sort of a project manager role, but someone who knows the least about Drupal will know all of that jargon and will explain what needs to be explained in order for these people to understand, and maybe not explain some of the fun guts of the site customization that a developer might go into that might just overwhelm and confuse the client. And then also know why your clients are in the room and plan your training so that the correct people are in the room. So if you have a big complex site with tons of different things and all of these different content admins for different pieces of it, you might have a specialized training and invite only this team who's adminning this part of the site to learn about their piece and only this other team for their piece. Whereas if it's just a small site, you might have everyone in the room. Understand where they're coming from and make really good use of their time, and you'll keep their attention and they'll learn better in your training. And make sure you know what you're going to say and also the why of what you're going to say. I think that's really important. Here's an example of one of these training outlines that I put together. And so you can see in a basic page, we're learning what a content type is. We're learning what a field is. You can do a survey of the room and ask people who what familiarity they have with Drupal, but make sure that you're training to the person who knows the least. And you can kind of call, oh, hey, people who know, I know you know what a field is, but we're just going to go through this really quick at the beginning. And you'll see sort of the whys, and you'll have that with you as you go through, and make sure that you're always explaining why you're teaching them these things. Otherwise, they'll be wondering, and they may stop paying attention to you. So now that we've prepared for our training, we're going to start leading it. So I already hinted at this a little bit, but know your audience. Start at the beginning and understand who's in the room, understand their experience level, understand what they do with this website and what they're here to learn. The more you know about them, like I did at the beginning of this presentation, the more you can target things to them. So that thing about, oh, hey, non-developers, this part might be technical at the beginning, I wouldn't have said had this room been 100% developers. So things like that. The next piece is road mapping and signposting. So this is something that I learned from competitive debate. It's something that debaters do. Your slide deck will do it automatically. So this thing at the top at the training is a signpost, but you won't have a deck when you're training someone how to use a Drupal site. So at the beginning you say, I will roadmap where we are in the development process, right? So we had a discovery meeting and we figured out what we were going to build, and then we did some user testing and we did some design and we built the thing and we tested it, and here we are at the training. And right here, what's going to happen next is you're going to test the site, you're going to put your content in, things like that, and that will help them remember, oh yeah, here's this thing that's been going on for however long, and this is why this meeting is happening, and this is what I'm expected to do next from it. But even at the training, we're going to start with structured content, and then we're going to talk about more flexible landing page type content types. And as you go, signpost where you are so that they know, like in a slide deck, where you are in the flow of that conversation. And I always recommend starting simple. So this is a friendly, easy, basic page. If you don't know Drupal, this thing is not so scary looking, right? And so you can say, look, here, this thing, that title thing, that's a field. When I ask you to write something in somewhere, when I ask you to put an image in somewhere, I'll be calling those a field. And you see that thing that looks like a kind of Word document customization? That's a WYSIWYG. That means what you see is what you get. And you can do things like bolding, and I don't know that I would advise you to strike through, but you have some different options there for formatting without knowing code. And you can talk to them about the hazards of putting things in from Word and things like that. And then once you get to a much more complex thing, they have these friendly things that they already know about that you don't have to then explain in the context of a much scarier looking content type, like the one I'm about to show you. And I always recommend showing these scarier ones side by side. So pull up the front end and pull up the back end next to one another, like this. So if you just looked at that right piece and you didn't know anything about Drupal, and maybe some of you are less familiar, that looks really scary because there's all of these different pieces coming together. There's all of, the add content button, what does that do? There's the settings things with the scary asterisk. But when you have them side by side like that, you can see, look, here's our mountain. That's where we put that mountain over there, and we could change that to something else if we wanted to. And when you see down this why attend section, you can see, oh, the subhead is that little green thing, and then the heading, learn, oh, that's underneath right there. And you start to learn what those mean. And I'll even tell clients, hey, if this is scary for you, pick this page that we built you as a sample page, open up its backend, and have that side by side with a fresh new backend page so that you can just copy these, pull a call out content thing over because you want it to look that same way. And so they can transcribe side by side from that demo page that you built them. The next one, and this is where I tease Nick a little bit, is to check your jargon at the door. So he came in and he was already views and fields and all of this Drupal jargon that is so familiar to us is not familiar to our clients necessarily. And so the way SRT means exit in French. So in case you didn't know, just a door joke, bringing it back to French. But I really advise picking one simple way to explain Drupal jargon, have that be your way of explaining it, and then explain it that way once every time at the beginning of training or whenever you use it with clients. So we use a lot of paragraphs and components. I call them puzzle pieces. And so I'll say, oh, hey, clients, imagine that you're building a fresh page and you have all these different cool puzzle pieces that you can arrange however you'd like. Those are called components or paragraphs. Or you might say taxonomy. These are just lists of vocabulary terms. And so I'll just say taxonomy, it's vocabulary. And then people say, oh, okay, I get it. And then you can use that jargon from then on and they'll understand where you're coming from. And then I think it's really important to ask the right questions at your training. So there's a lot of, do you understand this, or that kind of thing. And imagine if you were sitting in a room with your peers or people who work under you, or even worse, your boss, and someone said, do you understand this? My answer would be yes. It doesn't matter if I understand it or not. And so think about those people and what their motivations of being in that training. And just like Fatima talked about earlier, asking the right questions, ask them something a little friendlier. Like, how is this different than than the page that than the way you're structuring your content on your website right now? Or you might ask something like, what do you think is going to be most challenging about this new website? And you can really get at where they're coming from without giving them a really, a question that's really difficult to answer, honestly. So we've prepared, we've had our whole training, and we're done, right? Not quite. So a couple things to do after your training. You definitely want to send them training documentation. And just like how many trainings you have and how many groups of people you bucket your audience into, the training documentation that you put together should be specific for the site you're working on. So if this is a really small, easy marketing site, you might just have a screen share recording of the training that you put together and send that out to them. Even that's a really nice reference. But then as you get bigger and bigger in your site and in its complexity, you can expand out what you do. So if there's a section of the site that's complex and you know that there's going to be all this turnover of content admins because of how the company is structured, you might put together a specific PDF document with screenshots. Do this, do that, do this. Or I really like screen share videos because often trainings can be interrupted by conversation. And so have whoever's leading your training say, this is how you do feature A, and just have this feature A screen share that people can reference. And so there's all different sorts of complexity, and just understand what the needs of that company are, and make sure you build that into the scope of your project. And then also make sure that you're building in touch points. So even if you've asked these really friendly questions and people feel really open to asking questions, trainings can be really intimidating and overwhelming, especially if you're new with Drupal. Drupal can be really hard to, it can be really scary. I'm seeing some nods. And so just make sure you say, okay, here's your training, take a week to digest it. In a week, we're gonna have just a Q&A session. And so give them the space, make sure you have time in your budget and in your timeline to take that space. So, ended early. I hope I didn't talk too fast. It's like a hazard of being a debater, but we have a little time for questions, and we also really want to hear your feedback. So we're giving this session again at DrupalCon in a few weeks. So if there's something you really loved, if there's something especially that you didn't love, please come and find us. Like Nick said, we'll be around for the rest of the camp. And also just a shout out, which I'm sure you'll see all day today and tomorrow, for the contribution day on Saturday that's coming up. You don't have to know code to give back, says me who doesn't know code. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time. And we do have a couple minutes for questions if anyone has any for right now. Yeah?
How would you say the best way of going about being a project manager and trying to give this kind of information to a developer who may be more not as willing to kind of take those steps to help your end user? How do you make that? How do you bring up that? And how do you?
In the build or in the training or both?
In the build, like during the build, like when you're starting out, or maybe you've already built and you're kind of jumping in midway. Like, how do you make it more accessible?
I think for me, what I do, and I'll let you answer too, but I like to build pages and flag everything that's confusing. And if the help text or the field name isn't good, then I'll just say, not good, but if it's not clear, I might say, how do you feel about changing the field name to this? Because I don't know a lot about Drupal, but I know that you can build the backend guts field name and then change what people see later, and it doesn't mess with the structure of the site. So I do a lot of like rewrites, those sort of things, and then I would say even just, imagine if they know who these people are, right? Hey, imagine that you're Steve right now and you're trying to do this. Do you think Steve would be able to figure this out, and like invite them to write for Steve,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think what I would say is like try to frame it objectively as much as possible, because it can tend to be kind of like a personal thing, I guess, like for the developer, like, oh well, I thought about it and I built it this way for a reason, why don't you like it? I think like getting real feedback from the people using the site, like Lily said, I mean, like if you have like the time and resources to do it, like I've been blown away by how helpful user testing is, even if it's just with like one or two people, to be able to like come to them and say, this is what real people are saying, what do you think, is there a way to fix this? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you use for user testing as far as?
We've actually been doing it entirely manually. So we're doing smaller sets of users, typically like 5 to 10, not at once, but sort of like per test group. And then we work with our UX and strategy team, and we'll put together a mock-up in InVision. It's just sort of like a clickable mock-up, and put together usually like 5 to 7 questions around that, and then give them tasks and then ask follow-up questions about that. So no software that's really managing it for us. So that wouldn't scale to like if you want to do it with like 50 to 100 people, but I know like we've used usertesting.com in the past for like non-admin user tests, and that's worked well for us too.
Yeah.
A comment and then an unrelated question. The comment, when you mentioned on the fields, making them the right size, one of the things that we've learned from experience, especially for text fields, for short text fields, quote unquote, is go ahead and make the size of the text field on the back end the 255 and use the widget to limit the size. Because invariably we found they come back and say, we told you 10 characters, but now it's 14 characters or something like that. Once you've got data in there, you can't grow the size of the field. So if you initially just go ahead and make the back end, waste some database space, it's cheap these days anyways. Make that the full size, then you can adjust to the client's needs later on, and that gives you a lot more flexibility.
Yeah, that's a great point.
The question, on one of your also modules or one of your bonus ones, chosen, that one I'm not familiar with. Can you give a 5-second rundown of what it is?
Yeah, of course. It's a Drupal wrapper for a JavaScript library that basically formats select lists, multi-selects. I always forget the full scope of what it does. Like, I'll mainly use it for those two, and it just formats them in a friendlier way. So like a select list that has a bunch of options in it, it'll put a search bar in that, so you can do a text search within that select list, and it'll like dynamically limit it. And then for like multi-select fields, it was in the references slide in the presentation, it'll do sort of the format almost like you might see in like tag things on other websites, where it'll put the tags in there with like an X next to them, and you can mark them off to remove them. So really easy to configure. Like, you probably get up and running in like 5 or 10 minutes. It's definitely worth checking out. It works outside of Drupal too, and on the front end. So.
And we're just about out of time, and I hear the rustling. So thanks so much again, everybody, and I hope you have a really valuable MidCamp.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.